Hi, it's Lynn here, popping by with a free resource. If you're a singer who wants to teach but sometimes feels a little unsure or overwhelmed, I've put together some free resources to help you feel grounded and supported as you take your next steps. Just check the link in the podcast description and you'll get an informed, practical PDF guide to help you get started, plus a few follow-up resources to help you feel less of a fraud and more confident in your teaching journey.
In this episode, we are joined by researcher, musician, and founder of the F-List, Vick Bain, for an important conversation about gender equality in the UK's music industry. Drawing on her PhD research and years of experience, Vick explores the barriers that women and gender-diverse musicians are facing, from pay gaps and glass ceilings to representation and discrimination. It's a very thought-provoking discussion that challenges assumptions, shares the evidence and patterns, and asks what we can do and how we can play a role in creating a more inclusive future for the artists that we teach. Just to let you know, some listeners might find some of the topics discussed distressing. So just take a little pause and we'll be right there waiting when you're ready. Right, let's welcome Vick Bain. You are currently working towards a PhD, so how is that going?
Well, it's going. I'm hopefully in my last year. I'm right in the really hard thinking mode, just writing up my data analysis and preparing for my discussion chapter. So this really is the meat of the work.
So the end is in sight?
Yes, I've got to get a full draft submitted by December, with the full thing submitted by December.
What is your thesis about and what's it on?
I guess the easiest title is Women's Careers in the UK Music Industry. More specifically, I'm looking at barriers and enablers at different sort of sociological levels, so personal, family, and then the industry, organizations and industry and society.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is a lot. Well, I've spent 6 years studying for it now.
And in that time, what have you uncovered to be some of the EDI issues in the UK music industry at the moment and around women in particular?
Well, there are many. If we just look at gender, although gender and sex are very contested terms right now, but I come from a trans inclusive viewpoint. So if we just look at women and minoritized genders, we can see just how unequal and underrepresented they are across many aspects of the industry. And then if we look at other sort of elements like race and ethnicity or age, disability, socioeconomic background, and then you put them all together into what we call intersectionality, it really does reveal very starkly that there are disadvantages and privileges in all of those things, but the music industry seems to reward and benefit middle class, able-bodied, heterosexual white men.
When we talk about misogyny or gender inequality in the music industry, sometimes I feel it can lead to some people hearing that as men versus women. To me, this isn't actually a discussion about where we're suggesting all men have it easy or that every woman experiences discrimination. It's about understanding what the evidence tells us and what patterns are happening across the industry and what it means for us when we're teaching those people and facilitating them within the music industry. What does this discussion mean to you?
It isn't a battle, men against women, but I think if you look at the data, you look at the evidence and the research, there are clearly systemic patterns going on. I think that's what people need to realize. It's not the fault of any one individual. It's all of us, and that's hundreds of thousands of people the processes and the ways of working that have developed in the music industry over many, many decades. So I think we need to sort of depersonalize it and then look at the data and the evidence which shows the areas of underrepresentation, and then we need to understand what's causing those, what's driving them, and then together we can do something about it. And I also want to say as well, because I have had conversations with some men who've perhaps gotten very defensive and angry because they misinterpret conversations around equality as that they must be losing something, and they don't. If you have proper equality and inclusion, it should benefit everybody. And also, just to add, patriarchy as a system doesn't benefit all men either. We know that there are challenges for working class white men, and the same with working class women and people of any color. It's not that some people have all of the privilege and some people have none. It's very complicated. Intersectionality is, and all of the elements of our lives are very complicated.
Can we spend a bit of time looking at some of these statistics that have come out of current research? And maybe we could start with age discrimination.
Yes, well, I think age is a particularly challenging one for women. The UK Music Diversity Task Force surveys have shown quite consistently in their reports since 2016 that women in business roles tend to leave the industry progressively from the decade of their 40s. What those surveys don't tell is why. They just show the figures. But research that I'm doing and others have done really kind of look at parenting and caring barriers as being quite significant, but also women being blocked in their careers, reaching the glass ceiling. And the statistics for women as musicians is even younger. Women tend to start disappearing in their 30s as musicians, and we know, like the MU have published statistics showing that that's a gradual decrease. So by the time you get to women in their 50s and 60s, they're only a very small portion of professional musicians. There are all sorts of aesthetic barriers for women as musicians. We know that there is a massive pressure on women to look exceptionally beautiful before they be considered to be offered a record deal, and before people say, oh well, I know such and such an artist who maybe doesn't fit that characterization. They are very, very much in the minority. So it generally is that a woman will be judged on how she looks before her musical ability, and then as I say, other pressures for women in the music business for disappearing. So it's not a great welcoming industry for women as we get older.
We spoke with India Bourne on the podcast recently, a singer and a teacher, and she just happened to mention how when she started expanding her family and having children, she was thinking about how it would work with being on tour. So how can we actually help women, people who we might be teaching who are slightly older, or if we are musicians ourselves growing up in the industry, to continue a career where things like parenting and caring doesn't put an obstacle in the way?
It is an obstacle. I have spoken to musicians, but where there's a will and where there's a good bank account, if you can afford to have good financial support, you can bring babies and children on tour. There are women who are doing that. Not only doing that, but having people on their team bring their children along as well. But obviously, this requires money to support for childcare and good practices and safeguarding and all of those sorts of things. Lots of help. I've got experience of this. I brought my twins on tour when I was singing with the London Bulgarian Choir. We went round Bulgaria and my children were 5, and that, it took the entire choir and some friends and family to help look after my children. It was very tiring, and I didn't do it again, but it was possible. It was possible. But I think in most tours and most bands, they're such male-dominated environments that that's not even a consideration. So it really depends on who the artist is, and in these times when people are struggling to make any money out of a tour whatsoever, it really is artists of a certain level who can afford that sort of care. It would be wonderful if this became more common, more accepted part of touring. It would be absolutely wonderful. But I think in today's economic circumstances, that's probably not going to happen as quickly as I'd like to see it.
I read in the Musicians Census of 2024, and I'm just going to quote a little bit from that. Women and men are paid equally up to the point of earning an annual income of £34,000 from music, but after £34,000, men report higher earnings from music than both women and musicians identifying their gender in another way. Just 152 musicians, which was 3%, reported earning £70,000 or more from music each year, and 79% of these are men, while just 19% are women. And the Musicians' Union summarised that the gender pay gap is, despite the fact that women musicians are qualified to a higher level than men, with 14% more women having a music degree and 15% more having a postgraduate music qualification. So concerningly, this does not correlate with higher average earnings. What is your research on this? What have you found out?
I mean, my PhD, which is qualitative research, so I interviewed 50 women in music at varying career stages, although most were decades in to their careers, and some of them very high level. And I've heard stories about this repeatedly. Women musicians in bands being paid less than the men in the same band, on worse record contracts. Women in business who are clearly doing a job of a certain level, but not being given the title and therefore the salary commensurate to the responsibilities that they were doing. So in every sort of career pathway, blocks on their career progression. So this glass ceiling, despite being phenomenally qualified and exceptionally talented, all of the women I spoke to. So it was really frustrating and depressing listening to those stories. I've got my own personal experience in music, and all of the women I've spoken to in my through my career as well. But to see that in my research as well was very disheartening. And there's lots of other research as well, actually, about the gender pay gap. So the government pay gap reports, if you look at the music industry organisations which have had to report their official pay gaps over the past 9 years, the gap has remained pretty consistent. So women are paid 16% less, and that hasn't really budged over 9 years. And the IPO, the Intellectual Property Office, commissioned research about 5 years ago with a team of academics looking at music creators' income, and they also found that men were earning an average of £20,000 a year from their music, but women were earning 13, which is obviously, 20, even earning 20 is a struggle to survive on. 13 is almost impossible. You would have to, be relying on a partner or family or another job. So, there are real financial barriers for women surviving and succeeding in music. So, what do we do about it? Well, we do the research, we publish, the results, we inform the industry this is what is going on, and we can just put hope and encourage these organizations to do better. All of these major music companies, publish press releases every year saying, oh well, it's early days and we are trying and things are getting better and we love women and all of this. The official spokespeople come out with all of these statements around having to publish be transparent about their pay gaps. But the fact is, it's not really getting much better. So I think as an industry, we have to do better.
When it comes to setting a contract or like deciding on a salary for a musician, it's hard to imagine that somebody is sat there, rubbing their hands together with a wicked laugh and saying, ha ha ha, we're going to pay that person less purely because she is a woman. Does it happen like that? Or is there something deeply set? I'm a bit worried because you're nodding.
Yes, I've heard this from bookers. I've heard this from women as well, being very open about the fact that they know they don't have to offer women as much. They can get away with it. It makes the event, the festival or whatever, the stage more profitable than if they had to pay everybody fairly. I've heard it.
We could point to people like Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Adele, Dua Lipa, Sabrina Carpenter, and say, hold on a minute, women are thriving. And the equality conversation then sometimes seems to be easier for people to dismiss. But what does that success of those handful of women hide? And why can this lead to inequality being potentially more challenging to talk about sometimes?
Yes, so I call this the what about Adele question, where I've had very senior people in the music industry come back at me on my research by saying, well, basically, what about Adele? As if her success outweighs and negates the experience of tens of thousands of the struggles that tens of thousands of women musicians. It's particularly problematic. We know that women are doing slightly better. Inclusion in the charts and at major awards is slightly improving, but I think the discourse and the language in the press, for example, and therefore what we pick up in the industry is overblown. So, for example, women are only winning, I can't remember off the top of my head, I think women are winning about 25%, no more than 30% of Grammys. But, if you read the press reports, you would think that they were winning every single one. Women are slaying it, women are taking over, all of this sort of language. And women are not, certain women are doing very well. And they had to be ultra amazing and talented and work very hard to get there. But it's not like we have equality. So all of this discourse sort of masks a lot of inequality. And it also, I think, puts a lot of pressure on these women to sort of represent all other women, which is unfair to them. And even these women have spoken about the sexist challenges that they have faced over the years. I mean, Taylor Swift, she was sexually harassed by, I think it was a journalist or something. And she sued him and won. So if somebody like her has to go through experiences like that, then what happens to everybody else? So yeah, there's a lot that's masking. And also I do have to point out, I did have a look a little while ago at all of the creative team working on Adele's albums. So I did an analysis of all of the songwriters, producers, engineers, musicians, everybody who was listed. And on some of those albums there's about 100 people, and it's fewer than 5%, it's, sometimes just 2 or 3 women, including Adele, who are working on her albums, and all of the rest are men. So, unfortunately, an artist like Adele sits at the center and is literally surrounded by dozens and dozens of men producing her records.
I'm just pressing the pause button on the podcast for a very brief moment to invite you to book your free BAST call. If you've been thinking about joining the BAST community through one of our courses, but you just don't know which option is the best for you, then why not book your free Zoom chat with our very own Kimberly George, who has all the answers. Head over to basttraining.com/book-a-call/ and click that big blue button. That's basttraining.com/book-a-call/. People like Jessie J and Ray are independently managed artists. How does that contribute to this conversation?
Well, this is another interesting finding that is emerging from my PhD, that DIY independence is a career survival strategy. For many women, the major label system is not very kind, shall we say. I'm using my words carefully. In my interviews, I did interview a handful of women who had been signed, achieved big success, #1 hits and many awards between them, but none of them had a very good experience in that system, which is highly pressurized. So they'd all moved on and were working independently now, and maybe not achieving the same amount of success, but were still highly successful, but doing it on their terms, doing it at with more mental health and physical health and well-being, being able to balance their careers with children, having a much closer relationship with their fans, having more creative control. For the artists, it really did seem to be a much more positive step for them. So there's something about the major label system which really does, and I know it can be a problematic experience for men as well, but when over 75% of the people signed to major labels are men, and they're being signed for longer, they're being supported for longer, men have a much easier time in this label system than the women do. DIY is a strategy. So that's for the women who've been through the system, but also there are many women who are incredibly talented, really amazing musicians, who just couldn't get signed in the first place because the labels didn't know what to do with them, couldn't pigeonhole them, in other words, or were writing music that the labels deemed unpublishable or unreleasable, like Ray, with her label not wanting to release her work, which was just an extraordinarily stupid decision from them, Yeah, I was at the Brits watching her do her triumphant performance, with Universal sat watching, and I did wonder, well, what were they thinking, So I just think it's very short-sighted, and so the labels don't seem to be working for the women. That's for sure. And actually, I can also see women working in the business making a similar move to setting up their own businesses. They achieve as high as they're going to get, they hit the glass ceiling, and then they opt out and become self-employed, run their own businesses.
Have any of the big major labels come out with a statement themselves to talk about it from their point of view, or try and give across what was going on from their standpoint?
Well, again, there's these very carefully crafted statements which are published along with the gender pay gap reporting. And I have to say, so the music industry is very good at marketing and gloss and image and PR, so that billions of pounds go into maintaining that every year. So their statements alongside gender pay gap reporting kind of remind me of the power of that. But also in the Women Inequalities Committee Misogyny in Music report, there was one session where there were a whole series of what they call oral sessions, and various people were asked to give evidence in person in front of the committee, and it's all recorded. I did one with a few other sort of women in music campaigners. And then there was one session for the major labels. So the major labels, of course, sent women down to talk about how great working for them was, or being signed to them was. And I think, they did their best to talk away the inequality that is evident. You can read the transcript or watch the video, and I think it's a very interesting experience watching them try to hide away, make invisible the inequality in the system, of which they play quite a big part. You can find it by going onto the government.gov Women Inequalities Committee website and searching for misogyny in music, and there will be links to all of their sessions.
In the music industry then, what is highlighted as the areas where women are largely missing?
Many areas. I mean, definitely anything to do with technology, and that includes songwriting, composing. That was an area that I worked in for many years, for 13 years. So it was very obvious to me. So in composing, but also music production and engineering, which are incredibly important roles. Orchestral conducting, I'm still aware. I mean, there's been some initiatives and some movement, but it's still very male dominated. Of course, I mean, most signed artists and professional musicians still vastly majoritively men. Women tend to dominate or overrepresented in amateur and community music organizations. Men dominate in the professional roles, and in the business, and again, music technology roles, database IT roles, which are, I worked in the PRS for music building for 13 years, and it was pretty much all IT people and database royalties people, still very male dominated. And then as we go up the management layers, as we've discussed, all of the women disappear. So at boards, leadership, as managing directors and CEOs. So there are vast swathes of the music industry where women are still very underrepresented. Women are coming into the industry. In the business side, women are flooding into the industry, but so far the research shows is that they are still very much in the lower entry, unpaid, intern, not very well paid roles so far. So we'll just have to see over time if that starts changing, and if women are able to break through.
When we look at the musical theatre industry overall, there's a huge amount of females and female presenting performers coming through, and very little guys and boys and male presenting voices. So when it comes to fields where actually women dominate a little bit more, what happens then?
I mean, it's great that, women are able to succeed in certain areas, but what tends to happen when particular areas become overrepresented by women is that the status of those jobs falls. There may be more of a condescending discourse around that particular sector or those job roles, and they're not paid as much, and they're just generally not as well regarded. But also in the sector of music theatre, you still have to look at who are the directors, who are the producers, who are the composers, who are the people with the high status jobs who are in charge. Because if you look at nursing or primary education or, retail, if you look at those jobs where women are very overrepresented, it's still men in charge. Yeah, it will be interesting, I see, to keep an eye on musical theatre to see what dynamics emerge and how that is impacted by these gender stereotypes and prejudices.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because when we say that the areas or the jobs where women are most overrepresented, the value goes down. Whereas, would you say it's kind of the opposite, where the areas where males are predominantly featured, actually the value seems to go up a bit more?
We can see that through history. The original computers were women, and the work that they did was regarded as being quite low status. You know, the women working in Bletchley Park, they were not regarded as good jobs. Obviously, as time has progressed and we've become a very technology focused society, more men have dominated those roles. It's been a total switch.
The arts are quite unusual, I guess, because so many people, including myself, including lots of people who are listening to this podcast, lots of artists, are freelancers. How does that impact the way in which discrimination and harassment is challenged, and what can we do in those situations?
Yes, it's a very tricky situation, and it's one of the main factors that makes the music industry can be a particularly challenging experience for women in particular, because so many of us are self-employed and take short-term contracts. So there's no HR department, although there are problems with HR departments as well. I will say that, but you know, there's no. For many people on these contracts, there's no sort of formal person to go speak to if there's any sort of problem, and there can be a real culture of fear and silence because people don't want to complain. They don't want to think that they're going to get a reputation for being difficult to work with, and you know, all of these sorts of things. So there are many issues, and also this culture of silence can be exacerbated by the misuse of non-disclosure agreements, which thankfully, I think just a few weeks ago, it was one of the bills that was introduced into government, and it's now going through a consultation process. So the use of non-disclosures for complaining about discrimination and harassment will be banned in workplaces now, which is great news. So there's lots of problems. And I think lots of people don't realize that they may have rights and they may have protection. So I think it's really important for anyone working in music to be a member of a union or a trade organization that you can get some legal advice from. So I'm a member of the Independent Society of Musicians, and I often get legal advice to check out contracts or just ask a question, or you know, they've been fantastic for me. You need somebody on your team supporting you if you're just on your own. So I think understanding what your rights are is a real big step, and watching out for other people, I think, is a huge thing. So there's a sort of training which has become quite popular over the years called bystander training. There are organizations out there who can offer lots of free information, advice, and certain places which do free training as well for how can you be a better ally? What can you do safely? What can you do, and how can you support others around you if you witness any sort of discrimination and harassment? I mean, not just in the workplace, but for music, it can be in so many places, can't it? It can be in your local music venue or pub where somebody's performing, or a festival. And yeah,
I don't consider myself to be someone who has knowingly experienced any misogyny or discrimination in the workplace or during the contracts that I've had. How can we actually look out for red flags, though? Could they have gone undetected? Could we actually be experiencing something that we just go, oh, okay, that's normal?
Yes, and there's various levels, I think, because we've got pretty good legislation which has been developed over the past 5 decades. You know, it's less socially acceptable for people to be outrightly sexist or outrightly racist, what happens is that the behaviors become more covert. So you might not see it or recognize it or even know about it. So if you go for a contract or, a work contract or an opportunity and you just don't get it, but you don't know why, and they don't tell you why, you don't know what the reasons are. So, so doors might be closed to you. But I think if you've experienced it, you do pick up on it after a while. There might be behaviors which you are told it's just a bit of fun, they didn't mean it, it's not meant like that, or or you can't complain about that because that's just the way things are, or you might get brushed off or discounted or have some sort of comeback. But if if there is behavior, I don't know, being diminished, being spoken over or blocked out, then I think you do pick up on it after a while, if you've experienced it. If you haven't, then you are, I don't want to say lucky, because everybody should have the expectation of being able to go through their music careers without being discriminated against and harassed. If you have been on the receiving end of certain behaviors, and this can be from men and women, I do just want to stress that, you'll probably figure it out. I mean, the more overt behaviors can be pretty shocking. And I've heard all sorts of stories in my PhD interviews, which I would describe as Harvey Weinstein-esque, all sorts of stalking and assault and rape. And those are very extreme, but I only spoke to 50 women and I had no idea what they were going to tell me. There were definitely some very sensitive and shocking experiences disclosed to me, but also women who were saying, I don't feel like I've been overtly discriminated against, but I just get a feeling like I wasn't being told everything. I wasn't being given the opportunities I should have. It was, it was just a feeling. And that sort of disquiet, I think, can be just as bad.
Political landscapes inevitably have an impact on the arts, and we can look at any of the large UK manifestos of the parties to get an idea of what their views are on EDI policies. But something that seems particularly concerning is what Reform states that they will do, which is to replace the 2010 Equalities Act. And they say, and I read this out of one of their PDFs, which is, the Equalities Act requires discrimination in the name of positive action. We will scrap diversity, equality, and inclusion rules that have lowered standards and reduced economic productivity. What could this mean for the arts and those working in it?
Well, for our society, I think it is absolutely terrifying. And they don't understand what they're talking about, because that sentence doesn't make any sense that you read out, because it very clearly states in the Equality Act, which is the culmination of all equalities legislation from the 1960s. So it was decades of equalities legislation, which had sort of been incremental. It was sort of sorted out and put into one act. And it's a very good act. It's a very good framework. It specifically prohibits positive discrimination. That's unlawful. I am not allowed to discriminate against a white man because he is a white man. I might be allowed to not employ him or work with him or promote him or all of these sorts of things if he was a unprofessional, bad-tempered person, and I could prove that, but I wouldn't be allowed to discriminate against him because of his personal characteristics. But there is a part of the Equality Act which talks about positive action. You see, Reform are conflating the two. Positive action allows organizations to take steps to increase inclusion and diversity in their workforce by doing specific actions or running a project, running a mentoring project, running training, all of the work that I do, I'm allowed to say that this organization represents women and gender diverse musicians, and I'm allowed to run projects specifically for that group because there is decades, there's millions of papers worth of research and evidence showing that these groups are underrepresented, so need some help, some training and mentoring. To remove that would take us back to the 1950s in one fell swoop. And it is terrifying to me to think that we could be in a position where that could be a possibility. And really, I'm losing sleep over it at the minute. And we know that, because we're seeing with Trump, his overturning of DEI initiatives all through his government and his government departments, and the influence that that's had on universities and organizations. All of these American companies are just rolling back. They're just, chopping out all of their inclusion initiatives. And it wasn't like we were anywhere near equal anyway. And we're gonna roll back decades of blood, sweat, and tears to get that far. So it really concerns me, not just for the music industry, but for us as a society.
On a positive note, can you tell us about the F list?
Sure can. So we are, and I hope we're going to continue, no matter what happens in the future. So we are a community interest company that I set up in 2020. Founded in order to represent women and gender diverse musicians. Its most visible aspect is a directory, an online database. We have nearly 6,500 listings of musicians based just in the UK. And I founded that to make these musicians visible and findable and contactable by the industry. So our overall mission is to help these musicians overcome structural barriers in the UK music industry. And we do that through community training and advertising and creating professional opportunities. And we do a lot of research. So we kind of work at the crossroads of research, advocacy, community. We are also proud to be trans inclusive. I think that's really important. We see people in the trans community being under severe attacks at the moment, and so we work closely with many trans and gender diverse musicians. And we're just going from strength to strength. I've got a wonderful board, all women, 12 other women who work in all areas of the music industry and all sorts of different music genres. And we run various charity funded projects and do all sorts of things it's a real labor of love and just to help make the music industry a better place. Just a couple of weeks ago, we were in Leeds. We were partnered with Leeds Conservatoire and Leeds ICMP and had a fantastic two-day research conference, which was held in a beautiful building at Leeds City Museum. It was absolutely gorgeous, and we were looked after very well. Had about 40 presentations of varying sorts and about 150 people attending over the two days. So it was great. We really, we're founded on data and research, and we're sort of at the forefront of those conversations. So I feel like I do it to give myself hope and to give myself something positive.
Well, congratulations on that. I mean, some of the stuff we've talked about, you can't help but make a big old sigh and think, bloody Nora, what's going on? What gives you hope, Vick?
The work that I'm doing, and the women and the gender diverse people who I'm meeting through that work. So many amazing people. We nourish and support each other because we have to, because this is tough work. All of the musicians who I'm trying to help, I think nearly every day I have somebody contact me and give me thanks. And yeah, just seeing how well we've been able to help some people, especially through the funded projects that we've run. That's lovely. You know, we've got a couple of youth music projects going on at the minute, and that gives me hope for the future.
Thank you so much for coming on to chat about this today. It's so important, and I really thank you for giving up your precious time because you have a PhD to finish. But where can we all look out for that future work of yours, get involved in these projects?
Well, people, please sign up to our mailing list. Go on to the FLS Music's website, and a thing will pop up saying to join our mailing list. So please do. We send out a substantial once a month mail out. You know, if people want to contact me directly, they can do so through the FList website. There's a contact form on there, or my own website, vbain.co.uk, or my socials, LinkedIn or Instagram, Vick Bain.
Amazing. Well, to finish on a very positive note that 5 inspiring pop stars told us many a year ago, posh, baby, scary, sporty, and ginger, girl power, and girl power to you, Vick.
Thank you so much. Thank you.